All right, so part two of my red pill experience, exposure, more like. However, this is more chronicle. This is not necessarily the chronicle part two. It's more of a canonical part two. I'm getting into that because chronic chronologically, I actually came across Kevin Samuels before I came across O'Shea Du Jackson Obsidian. The reason why I'm going into O'Shea and Obsidian right now is because the lore of the Manosphere, Black Manosphere, Manosphere Jason, all of that hoo ha, it's actually wild, and I am a lore guy, which is why I've postponed writing my two books. They're fiction, very lore based. Because of that, that's why, like I said, that's why I'm talking about O'Shea and Obsidian today. And honestly, I'm and honestly, I'm more or less, I don't hate O'Shea. It's more or less I find him annoying. When I say I find him annoying, I mean I don't like him as much as I used to. And the reason why is because he's he has black conservative grifter energy, but he just does it differently. And the way he goes about his black conservative grifter spiel, his black conservative grifter antics, is when he makes his videos. When he makes his videos and he features and his videos are when they have white people as the center. I don't have anything against white people. It's just he holds them up and then says these guys are good at something black people aren't good at, and such as organizing their group. He made a video about Nick Fuentes, basically talking about how he never took Nick Fuentes seriously. He thought he was going to go away in the span of a couple months or so, but then he galvanized support from the far right, and he said black people are not good at galvanizing support like Nick Fuentes. And if you remember the Pearly Things situation from, yes, just Pearly Things, Pearl Davis, from the whole slavery, black people embellished slavery back in 2021, 2022. Yeah, before she went and said that, before she had that podcast with Nick Fuentes and where she said that slavery is embellished, O'Shea actually brought her up in a video of his, basically saying that the reason why Pearl Davis is as successful as she is on YouTube as a 26-year-old woman, she was 26 at the time, I don't know how old she is now, is because she works harder than black people on the platform. Yes, he said, yes, O'Shea said Pearl Davis just works harder than black people on YouTube, completely discounting the fact that her mom is basically a higher up in a media network, and her dad basically came from money. So yes, Pearl came from money, but he didn't talk about that. And when she did have her incident with Nick Fuentes regarding slavery, he did backtrack, but he didn't backtrack until people started giving him some heat, and that's when he chose to backtrack. Just like he did the same exact backtracking with Anton Daniels. I'm going to talk about him in another video. In other words, he doesn't necessarily say he was wrong until people call him out for it. I have a problem with that. If you're wrong, just say that. People actually will have more respect for you when you say, yes, I'm wrong, I'll do better in the future. He doesn't. He waits till people tell him, hey, why are you doing this? Hey, we need to do better, blah, blah, blah. And speaking of Pearl, when you bring Obsidian into the mix, I never knew who Obsidian was other than the Kevin Samuels shout out. And him talking about, in other words, Kevin Samuels talking about Obsidian's book. So during the Pearl Davis slavery was slavery was embellished debacle, both Anton and Obsidian basically told Pearl, "Hey, you do not owe these Negroes an apology. You owe nothing to these Negroes." Blah 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 blah, and Obsidian what made him so much more egregious than Anton at the time was Obsidian basically saying there was a black woman in his chat basically saying some stuff that she absolutely needs to apologize to black people. She absolutely needs to do this, that, and third. And he basically said, this is the black female effery that we have to deal with that's holding black people back. In other words, he went out of his way to publicly degrade some random black woman in his chat for the benefit of this white woman who, again, I don't have a problem with white women. I don't have a problem with white women. I don't have a problem with white people. I have a problem with white supremacist ideology, which anybody from any race, especially if you look at Twitter right now, you see all the most prominent white supremacist pages are ran by brown people. So yes, you can be brown, you can be black, you can be whatever, and still have white supremacist ideology. White supremacist ideology affects everybody negatively. We're all, as much as normal white people don't want to see it, yes, white supremacist ideology affects you too. Now, back to me talking about O'Shea and Obsidian. So, that was only one aspect of me talking about him being a black conservative grifter. Another aspect that basically made his grift even worse was he absolutely used his platform to inspire his followers to vote against Kamala Harris in the election. Keep in mind, this is a man who lives in Africa and on a few occasions has said that he has no intentions of living around you Negroes. Yes, he said that at least 2 or 3 times in some of his videos, but because of the conservative ideology and the blackness, some people still chose to follow him. Why would anybody want to follow somebody who says, "I ain't trying to be around you"? That's for them to figure out. And listen, I'm just here. I'm not trying to be a part of anybody's group who says they ain't trying to help me. But that's just me. They're gonna have to figure that out for themselves. So he absolutely used his platform to galvanize against Kamala Harris, basically saying if Kamala gets into the office, it was just going to be an office of booty clappers, office of inspiring women to just be all types of hoes because he said black women are recalcitrant, black women are rebellious, all this down the third, every single stereotype about rebellious women you can think of, just throw black in front of it. And if you look at the state of O'Shea and his page now, in his channel now, being still living in Africa, this man is basically on a crusade going against African scammers because he got scammed. And which, okay, but the biggest problem I have in that situation, I don't like people just like I don't like people coming over here. I don't like Haitians, Africans, Jamaicans coming over to America and saying black Americans are lazy. I don't like black Americans going over to other countries and saying, "Hey, the people here are scammers." Yes, I look at it as a both ways type of thing. That being said, I do not play with the tether talk. Remember, white supremacy hurts us all. Don't come with me with that tether talk. Don't say, "Hey, you're a tether. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve to have these conversations." You have to remember the transatlantic slave trade absolutely affected everybody. It absolutely affected all of us. How do you think a lot of blacks ended up in the Caribbean? the transatlantic slave trade? How do you think a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans have their such a mixed ancestry with Afro Latinos? Transatlantic slave trade. A lot of you forget or don't even know that the history of the Bahamas was essentially a slave prison. Basically, a lot of slaves were sent to the Bahamas, and for no other reasons. When I say slave prison, for their job was basically to make rich one percenter white people feel like basically have they can enjoy themselves. So in other words, when you take your cruise over to the Bahamas, understand it's been tradition to go to the Bahamas so that black people, slave people over there, were forced to provide you with some type of entertainment to enjoy yourself. Like I said, I'll talk about Kevin Samuels in a part 3 or 4. I'll talk about Anton Daniels in a part 3 or 4. I'm out.